this is for you. My name is Michael Rooks. I'm the Whelan Family Curator of Contemporary Modern Art, and it's a privilege to welcome you all here tonight. Thank you for coming. This is a program we call Conversations with Contemporary Artists, and we started this program 10 years ago when I joined the museum. Our first program was with Jeff Koons, and since that first program, we've hosted artists like Kiki Smith, Julia Moretu, Radcliffe Bailey, Alex Katz, Cause, so many others. And frankly, they just keep getting better and better. And tonight is an example of that. We've got 6 artists from Atlanta who are part of an exhibition in our galleries. And in case you haven't heard when you picked up your ticket stubs, the galleries are open tonight until 9. So after the program, please take your ticket stubs and you can get access to the museum and go see the exhibition. So I encourage you to do that in the event that you haven't had the chance to do so yet. So tonight's program is intended to provide a space for conversation between and among our 6 guests tonight, whose work is on view in the exhibition called Of Origins and Belongings, drawn from Atlanta. And the exhibition really picks up where we left off with the previous 2 exhibitions that happened in 2013 and 2015. And if you recall, those exhibitions were large exhibitions. The last one, in fact, was called Sprawl, which was intended to suggest the nature of our city we live in, but also the vast diversity of our artistic community here in Atlanta. We have, in the course of thinking about the next iteration of this exhibition that explores artistic practice in the city through the discipline of drawing, we've made 2 important changes. And the first being that we've narrowed the scope and scale of the exhibition in order to provide a meaningful exchange between the artists and their works in the exhibition. And secondly, that we have organized this show around a subject or an idea, so that a subject and idea can then provide a point of departure for that conversation between the works in the exhibition. And I'm so proud of how it turned out, and the exhibition is, I think, incredibly rich and meaningful on many levels, and beginning with just the level of quality of the work in the exhibition, and then the conversations between and among the different artists in the show. The distinct voices and diverse perspectives of our guests tonight represent worldviews that are informed by and enriched by their cultural heritage, and also the bond that you all share as members of our artistic community here. So while you retain your individual points of view and perspectives and approaches to making art, you're also a member of this group of artists who really do enrich our city in so many ways. So quickly, I'm going to introduce our artists, and I haven't arranged everyone on the sofa according to the, this is alphabetical, so we didn't arrange everyone alphabetically here. Jessica Caldas, to my far right, is an artist, advocate, and activist whose work deals with connecting personal and community narratives to larger themes related to sexual and gendered violence and systems of disempowerment and social justice. Yehimi Cambrón, to Jessica's left, is an artist, advocate, and activist educator and activist, Yehimi, whose work deals with connecting personal and community narratives to larger themes related to related to her own experience. I need to pick this up instead of reading it. Sorry. This is, I try. I'm trying to be creative, yeah. But Yehimi, of course, draws upon her experience as a DACA recipient here in the United States, in Atlanta, and presents a personal perspective on this highly politicized immigration debate that we are experiencing now. Salman Z, to my right. Oh my God, this is perfectly, wow. It's going well. Is an artist and educator who creates work that explores issues of acculturation, spiritual enlightenment, and cycles of creation and destruction, dissolution, and coalescence in his work. Wihro Kim, who's to my left, is an artist, an artist who was born in New York. I don't usually read, but I didn't want to miss anything out. Wihro was born in New York, but he's a Georgia boy. Grew up here in Atlanta, and Wihro's paintings present dreamlike images and scenes that suggest an emotional interiority conditioned by memory and longing. Dianna Settles, to my left, is a native-born. Are you the only native-born Georgian artist here? I believe so. I think you are. All right, forget it. Never mind. Dianna was born in California. We can pretend. But besides being an artist, printmaker, painter, draftsperson, you're a musician, a gallerist, and your work focuses on everyday commonplace settings to counter fetishized and passive images of women of color. And finally, Cosmo Whyte, to my far left, is an artist and educator as well, whose work contends with the legacy of colonialism and the urgency of forced migration. So let's give them all a round of applause. So we've done this informally, except Cosmo was not able to join us before in a conversation for Burnaway. And I think it went so well. So it's going to be rather informal, and I think just a conversation between you all, and I'll jump in when I can. But I thought I'd start out just throwing out the question that we began the exhibition with, and that is, in what ways, if any, does your work deal with or negotiate cultural belonging and or cultural difference? So we have 4 mics, so I'm going to pass my mic over to you, Alan.
All right. Cultural belonging and difference. So my work for this show was sort of new to me for the public. It deals with my heritage of being half Puerto Rican and my family's Puerto Ricanness, which is not something that I have publicly made work about a lot. So the ideas that I was thinking about were very much prompted by Michael's question about cultural belonging and difference, and that. And there's a couple of different ideas, and I'm going to try not to get too expansive, but you know, the first being that for Puerto Ricans who are Americans, sort of, the experience of being in a country that is a territory that has sort of this second-class statehood where we are technically a part of the U.S., but we don't have the same, Puerto Ricans don't have the same full citizenship that other Americans have. And this is a relationship that has been fraught for a long time. So that's sort of like the one sort of broader piece that I was interested in the work. And I think sort of that sort of difference is highlighted, the difference of being Puerto Rican American is very much highlighted by the sort of very colonial relationship that the island has to the States. And then I was... I think it's... Yeah. Well, this is... It's on a loop. Yeah. So the work that we were just looking at was Jessica's. The big blue pieces that have cycled up a couple of times. Oh.
That might be difficult for us, but when it comes up, I'll try to point it out.
Yes, I apologize. We don't have the control. So anyway, so that broader issue was like the initial thought. But then I was also really interested in my family's relationship to being Puerto Rican and American and my own personal relationship. And so my grandmother and grandfather were born in Ponce, both of them, and they traveled back and forth, as many Puerto Ricans do, between the island and the States for most of their childhood. And they actually, even though they were both from the same neighborhood in Ponce, they actually met in the same neighborhood in New York. And there's something very romantic about that and their experience of sort of belonging to both places. And for my grandfather especially, who wrote down most of his life story before he passed away, his written story is just, one, it's very rich. It goes back to all the way of being 6, but it's full of this deep love and pride in being Puerto Rican, but also this love of being American, and I was very interested in how those two identities were not at odds for him, but for how so much of America, those identities can conflict, and that many Americans don't understand that those identities can coexist. So there was that. And then there's my own personal relationship to being Puerto Rican, which is that, I've said this joke now a couple times, so all the other artists have heard it, but in my family we joke about being Puerto Rican because I wasn't I wasn't raised speaking Spanish, and I didn't go to the island growing up, and I just don't have the same experiences that my father had growing up on the island. And I think it's coming up next. Yeah. And so, no, the next slide is. So it's coming up. It's all blue, and you'll see it. Oh, nope, no, I was wrong. Sorry. But for me personally, I have a lot of conflict about how to own being Puerto Rican, because I'm not necessarily Puerto Rican enough to some people. Like I said, I don't speak Spanish fluently, and but I also have always had this fierce pride around that part of my identity and my family and the experiences I know that are specific to that. This is it. Yes. So those are my grandparents in the center, yes. And then layered into all of these, it's hard to see in this picture because these are very, very large, are images of my family from the island. And this left piece, in that left piece were images of homes that my family lived in on the island that I've never seen, but that I've heard stories about that are very deeply connected to. On the right side, this is a silhouette of one of the main houses that my father grew up in the States. And so there's this kind of constant push-pull of one of the pieces is called Aka or Aya, which is this idea of here or there, or neither being here or there, which is a pretty common experience, I think, and everybody will talk about it. All right, I'm going to stop now.
So I sort of wanted to explore belonging through the lens of my experience as someone who is undocumented. And I felt like this was a great opportunity to do so because, I've never really put I chose to do portraits of my family, and this was sort of a difficult decision to make because in the portraits I explore the immigration statuses of everyone in my family. And so the series is called, it's a series of 7 portraits. It's called Family Portrait. And so for me, it was growing up in the United States. Of course, when I immigrated here, my parents, before we came, told us we were going to be undocumented. And then when we crossed the border, we became undocumented as soon as we crossed. But as a 7-year-old, that doesn't mean anything, except that you know you're undocumented without knowing what that actually means for your life. So as I transitioned into adulthood, I sort of started transitioning into this illegality and starting to feel really I didn't belong, I was a part of my community. And then when I started trying to get a driver's license, I couldn't get a driver's license. And so I started feeling a sense of not belonging.
And these are Yehimi's works.
So these are my 7 portraits, and they're text-based. You can't really see the text in the image, but the entire background has heavy, bold text that is the stories of each of the people in the portraits that came from conversations that I had with each person in my family. And then sort of like in the background, there's these more subtle layers of the documents that we each have in our lives, like literally our birth certificate, our passports. For me and my two brothers, it was our correspondence that we were receiving from USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, about being DACA recipients and getting our DACA renewed. Whereas for my little sister who was born here, the documents in her portrait are her American birth certificate and her American passport. And so I really just wanted to highlight the complexity of immigrant families and of mixed status families, and just sort of doing that through their stories, and also showing that even though everybody has like all these documents that sort of dictate what they can and cannot do and whether they do and don't belong, I think that our stories as human beings moving to another place to not just survive but to thrive, that sort of is like what helps us belong, right? So I'm gonna pass it on.
Hello, my name is Chaomin Xie. Originally, I'm from China. When I first hear this theme, origins and belongings from Michael, I was very excited, but meantime it's a little bit kind of scared, because origin, I think it can be translated as authenticity. Yes, okay. And ethnic origins, cultural origins, this kind of theme or topic. It's tiger, yeah. It's not the ocean, it's the landscape of Mars. The tiger on Mars with baby Buddha on it. Okay, I think, what I did, okay. Authenticity, cultural authenticity or ethnic authenticity. I think this is a very tough question. And I feel I'm pretty pessimistic about this. It's largely because what I see, what I hear from the news media, and I feel today's political sphere just make me feel very pessimistic. Okay, not only because I'm an immigrant. I feel today maybe we are into another dark age. We are overly emphasize the authenticity, or can be translated into singularity versus whole. Okay, my work show in the show, they are my reflects of different kind of political issue I read from news media. I feel, okay, I said that we are focused too much on the authenticity, singularity, and maybe we forget, or we feel it's pretty easy to think about the belonging. And but for me, belonging is a big challenge for everybody. Belonging need a courage. You need to belonging for me, I think, is like a melting. Like from my experience, I come from China, so my cultural origin, if I think about that, what's my cultural origin? Is Chinese Confucius idea, philosophy, or communism, or it can be a lot. It's a long chain. Okay, and then I come to United States. I'm speaking a foreign language. I think for me, origin is exactly just like the theme, origins. It's heterogeneous. But my personal experience is if I think all different kind of culture, ethnic origin inside me, they are conflicting each other. Is that true, or that's just fictional? And actually, this idea is after I hear from Michael's this theme, origins and belonging, and more I feel it's fictional, because I don't feel mental life fall apart. Okay, where I have so many different origins inside my mind, inside me, and my work. I got a deep influence from Buddhism. Buddhism is from India. So my feeling, my strategy is to step back instead of try to search for the conflicting. I want myself to melting to different origins.
Right. I mean, I think what part of what you were saying, I think, was that there's a danger of essentializing the idea of origins and ethnicity, so that people may expect your work to look Chinese, right? Or if they know, Dianna, that you're of Vietnamese heritage, that it needs to look Vietnamese in some way or another. And the idea of origin is something that's more fluid, I think, which is why we selected that word. Anyway.
Hi, I'm Dianna. A little backstory to kind of like inform the question about origin and belonging is my father is a Vietnamese immigrant and refugee, and my mom's family is white. I was born not in Georgia, which I just remembered at the beginning of this talk, but in California. And this is my work, yes. Mm-hmm. For as long as I can remember, having like a mixed upbringing, I've felt like caught in this kind of liminal space where when I'm with my mother's family, I've never felt so Vietnamese. And when I'm with my father's family, I've never felt so white. And so it's been a really interesting experience, especially moving to Georgia as a young child and growing up in a rural town where the population, according to the most recent census, is 98.5% white. There are not very many people who looked like me. And there was a lot of insecurity that came with that and feeling very othered. For my father, like he and my older siblings or half-siblings, they spoke Vietnamese with one another, and he wanted for his first child born in the States to speak English and not have an accent. And so at a very young age, he stopped speaking Vietnamese with me, and it was very easy to know when I was like the butt of the family joke, because they would switch to Vietnamese and then there would be laughter. And so there was like this funny juxtaposition between having pride in where you're from and wanting to assimilate and wanting to belong somewhere. And so like being raised or growing up somewhere where I didn't necessarily feel like I was the same as everyone else, the ways that I was able to celebrate these parts of myself that felt different were often very, very private, and they were through snacks, and they were through like anything that I could latch onto that felt recognizable. And so there was anime and like things like that. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Vietnam for the first time. And it was a really incredible experience being in a space where there were so many people who looked like me, and there was so much artwork that looked like me, and I felt very represented. And something that felt really interesting or spoke to me was this kind of clumsy space in between the influence of European colonization and like classical like renderings of figures, and then like more simplified traditional Vietnamese art. And so that felt like really exciting for me to kind of explore. And so through a lot of my works, like the type of belonging that I try to like imbue the pieces with, or like hold on to, are kind of these like secret signals for other people who might recognize these things and like be able to see themselves in that. And so it's like canned soy milk and Naruto stickers and things like that.
Hi, my name is Wihro Kim. It'll come up sometime, but so the question was cultural belonging or not in the work. I think like, well, I'm just like, I'm not really even like really thinking that much when I'm like making work. It's just like trying to achieve a state. That's one of them. That's one of them, yeah. And then the other colorful one is mine also. But I'm trying to like reach this state, I guess, and yeah. Sorry. And it, like, I guess it also like similar to what others on this stage are saying, like Jessica and Dianna, that like this feeling of like not really belonging in America or where your family heritage comes from. And like, it's not something I really thought about a lot as a kid, though it's definitely something that affected me subconsciously. And I think I always held on to a place that was somewhere else, like somewhere just beyond the horizon or behind a wall or something. Like, it's somewhere that really exists in imagination. And I feel like I can kind of access that in painting, and so it's just like I'm not like really consciously saying that this work is about like belonging or not, but like that this is how I lived my life and this is my response to my life. Like, yeah, it's not like quite so, I don't know. Yeah, just a emotional, like, what's the word? Synthesis or something.
Hi, so my name is Cosmo. Yes, this is my work. All right. So I came to the US when I was 19, and at this point, I've lived in the United States the majority of my adult life. I migrated from Jamaica, and initially it felt like navigating a minefield in terms of understanding the nuances and many moving parts of race in this country and politics. And I also came at a very turbulent time in American history. So I came for college, and my first day of college was September 11th. So it really felt like the country had kind of flipped itself on its head. And all of this while I am a 19-year-old trying to figure out who I am and all of that. So in response to Michael's question, I really thought about this sense of navigating a minefield, which still persists to some extent, but understanding that my understanding of politics and race and all of these many moving parts within an American context is very much informed by my place of origin, which is Jamaica. my place of birth, which is Jamaica, and the many moving parts in that structure, whether it's colonialism, which feels very, very present, or the remnants of colonialism, which feels very, very present there, whereas in here, that feels like a far removed topic. So I'm always trying to connect these dots so that my world makes more sense, because if I view it all in isolation, none of it makes sense. And so that's what I'm aiming to do with my work. And in response to Michael's question when he posed it to the group, that's where my mind went as well. And then also thinking how, because even this notion of origin feels like a minefield as well, because then we branch off into many different diasporas, and how does one navigate all of that is something that I'm constantly trying to figure out in my studio. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me now and over the course of this exhibition was the idea of these intersections that we all participate in, that crisscross our lives, our practices, and the scholar Homi Bhabha describes these spaces in between the intersections of difference, where we, in Bell Hooks's words, come to voice. We find our voice in that space of difference. So it's both a space of struggle and also a space of empowerment. And that there is this problem of talking about origins, because again, that can become something that's essentialized, that really threatens to define one in a way, or rather to delimit one in a way that's that precludes the notion of belonging and of sharing and of this kind of a fluid kind of cultural sharing. So thinking of Bell Hooks, I've been thinking about her work a lot lately, given our political climate, and I just quoted something from her essay, Choosing the Margin as a Space of Open Radicalness, radical openness. And as artists, we all sort of occupy, you all occupy that space of the margins, just by the very fact of being an artist, right? But then also, we then have to negotiate identity, who we are, where we come from. So again, Bell Hooks describes this moment that's so important in the space of the margin of coming to power, coming to voice. I was wondering if there's a moment that you all remember when you came to voice as an artist or as an individual.
I could kind of say something. Well, specifically about the margin in a different sense. I remember in school, I would always draw in the margins of paper, you know, and it was such a free space. Like, you know, you have the main thing here, and then the margin, you can kind of just do anything, and like that idea of radical openness, like maybe it can happen in the margins because that's where the free and kind of maybe even like leftover things can exist, like not in the main, you know, like official whatever, you know.
Okay. Yeah, I do believe artists live in the margin. Only because we live on the edge, on the margin, we have such a strong desire to melting ourselves into the main territory. I don't want to say mainstream, main territory. But I feel this is very, very difficult. This is not only because art is such a special field, not a lot of people really understand or really want to understand or access contemporary art. That's because even for any individual to try to let him herself to belong to the society, a culture sphere, or even a family, which means the individual should take off the shield in certain part. I think individuality or the sense of self is kind of like a shield to protect ourselves, but to let self to devote into a larger community, culturally, physically, it needed to take off a certain shield, and it's very difficult. Just you need to take off certain part of yourself, let other people in, and you are ready to enter to other people or to others. I think this is very challenging thing. And as an artist, I always aware of this, and that motivates me to keep on doing art, make exhibition.
Yeah, it's like creating a space within the existing power structure to function and to live and to, anyway, Yehimi.
Yeah, I have a story. So when I was in 10th grade, and your question just took me to that moment, like right away. When I was in 10th grade, I read Night by Elie Wiesel, which is about him surviving the Holocaust. And in some really weird way, I felt so connected to him because I was starting to figure out like what my undocumentedness meant. And so I entered this art contest that my teacher encouraged me to enter. I got third place, and I was invited to be recognized at the Georgia Capitol under that beautiful golden dome, and I was gonna get $50, which I was like, I'm securing the bag. And so I was there with my mom, and we were the only like people of color there, and after we were recognized, there was an exhibit, and my teacher had me sit down and said, just wait here, I'll go get your prize. And she left and came back a few minutes later and told me that they couldn't give me my $50 because I didn't have a social security number. And so here I was, right, like being an artist and using my artwork to like remember people who were murdered in a genocide, right? Such a social justice issue, and I was told that because I didn't have a set of numbers, I didn't belong, right? Like, I had the skill, but ultimately I wasn't going to get the prize. And so I think that moment was like one of the moments where I, as an artist, as a human being, felt like I was literally like on the edge, in the margins, and didn't quite understand why this was happening to me. Like, I just felt like it was my fault and like I was a failure. But that moment also became the moment where I started to really learn about my immigration status and what that meant for my future, what that would mean for my dreams of achieving a higher education, and all of that awareness that moment of uncertainty and heartbreak brought was essentially, I think, what led me to keep fighting. And whereas being undocumented is not something that you tell everyone, it's something that you're supposed to keep quiet and you're supposed to just stay in the shadows, I told all of my teachers. I was like, I don't know what this means, but this is what's happening, and can you help me? And so I was teaching my teachers, and they were open to learn from me, and eventually that's what got me to Agnes Scott, where I learned about the systems of privilege and oppression and had a bigger understanding of like how the system is designed to create a population of people who is just undocumented, right? And to me, that was really powerful for my work, because I think that acknowledging that undocumentedness and then learning how to overcome the mentality of being undocumented is what helps us thrive, essentially.
I will respond. So this is not necessarily a moment within my own artwork where I felt the presence of the margin and the power of the margin. But as I said before, I came to the US when I was 19, and I had received a scholarship to go to a liberal arts college in Vermont. So I went straight from Jamaica to Vermont. And it was, needless to say, it was culture shock. And I remember arriving on campus, and there was, according to US News, this college that I went to, which was a fantastic school, Bennington College, it was 99.9% white. And I remember there was one Nigerian guy at school, and he ran up and gave me a hug. I'd never met this guy in my life. But fast forward to my junior year, no, sorry, my senior year, and I really feel the immigrant goes through a crash course in the nuances and politics of America, and depending on how open the immigrant is to taking on the politics of their new home determines when they hit this learning curve. And for me, part of that was senior year in college, coming from a country that is majority black, still a diverse country, but majority black. I never viewed myself in minority politics. And so there was a moment where I had hit the stage where I was angry and not quite sure why and how to articulate that. And you mentioned bell hooks. I, by pure chance, came across Black Looks by Bell Hooks, and that was a defining moment for me in terms of how it oriented the way I wanted to move through the world, but also the way I would view race, politics, representation. And so while this is not necessarily an example of how it manifested itself in my art, it was definitely a moment that I felt informed later work.
I know we want to open up the stage for questions from you all. So I have one other question that just gets to the work in the show, really. Aside from what we're talking about right now, which is critical to the premise of the exhibition, one of the things that we've always done with the exhibitions that focus on artistic practice in Atlanta through drawing, the practice of drawing, the discipline of drawing. And often you think of drawing as a contemplative practice, something that's subjective, something that's very intimate, and therefore very personal. So just a simple question, what does drawing, the act of drawing, the discipline of drawing mean to you all? Jessica.
Drawing is something I've been doing my whole life. I was very lucky and very privileged to have a family that embraced art as a thing that you could actually do in your life. And so when it became clear that drawing was something I would do all the time, the idea that it was going to be my life and my career was something that formed really early. Like, I would think I was in like first grade, and I was like, I'm going to be an artist. It's going to be great. And I drew all the time, and I think it's very, for a long time I thought it was just something you did in your sketchbook or your journal to like process all the thoughts you have and all the feelings that you're going through. And then I think I stepped away from it for a while. It was still something I did as like a small thing, but in undergrad I studied printmaking, and that became what I did artistically. And then after undergrad, I started doing performance art and installations and other things. And it's actually only been recently, as I was getting my master's, my MFA, which I just got, that I like returned to drawing, but in this way that was really like approaching almost any medium as a drawing tool, and doing it at any scale I wanted, and as sort of like aggressively as I wanted to. And my drawings are, which is pretty much what I do the most now, are these large layered things that are where the first layers are never completely hidden from the last layers, and there's other materials collaged into them often, and sometimes in the installations there's objects layered on top of the drawings and drawings on top of the objects, and it becomes this, for me, this tool that still is me processing all the feelings and thoughts and ideas I have about the world, and trying to understand especially a lot of the things that are happening socially or politically. But it's also a way to see all of that history at once. Like, I can layer these drawings and these materials as a almost like memory or research underneath all of this other stuff. And that's how it's really functioning for me, I guess.
Yeah, mine is, I think, really quick. So I think for me, drawing has meant like that I actually have access to making art, because it's just such a accessible like material to have. You can draw with anything, and making especially these pieces for the High Museum in the basement where I live with my entire family, and my brother plays video games in the other corner. Like, drawing became really essential, because then I could take these drawings and make them digital and alter them and create layers and layers and layers on my computer. And so I think it has given me access to like actually create art. And I just feel like it's the foundation of any other type of art. So I find myself going back a lot to like my contour line drawings that were the foundation of a lot of my prints when I was a student at Agnes Scott and doing like printmaking and silk screens. I think that's like the most beautiful way for me to portray people who are undocumented, or people who are immigrants, and show like their humanity and what makes them like individuals and human beings. Yeah.
Okay. I used to think drawing is my favorite medium, and until now I still feel my favorite. I'm teaching at a college, Clayton State University. My favorite topic always the drawing, but after actually in recent 2 years I practiced drawing a lot. Then I gradually realized to think about which media is my favorite is a very strange thing. I'm Chinese. In ancient China, in the Chinese art history, they have no such term called drawing, and it's only painting. And drawing, this word was created or introduced from, I guess, from Japanese in 20th century, early 20th century. And in recent 2 years practice, I gradually feel they have no such big difference between drawing and painting, and I feel I'm kind of traced back to the ancient Chinese concept of painting. But the medium I'm using is graphite. Graphite in Chinese means stone ink. In Chinese, ink always means liquid, but the stone is solid. So it's very kind of paradoxical kind of feeling, and I really love it. That's the reason I'm obsessed by the word stone ink first, and then I start to pick the medium and then practice. Okay, that's it.
I think for me, prior to this show, drawing has always been like really attractive to me because of its immediacy, and it's also always felt like a very intimate act, like that was never the thing that I would share were my drawings. Like those were like very, very early ideas, and then kind of like figuring out how to process these things. So this like secret, intimate thing that also is like kind of magic in this way, where you can like collage all of these different details into one environment. Like my first journal had drawings that I did of me slow dancing with Leonardo DiCaprio in them. And so this was this like magic thing where this never happened, but it could happen because I could make it happen. And I have proof of it. But yeah, I think one of the things that feels like really good and felt like a really interesting challenge creating work for the show was figuring out how to keep pushing through this like doodle kind of stage, and like thinking about these initial thoughts with more intention and really just like going for it, I guess.
I guess drawing. I think drawing for me allows a way to kind of just ask a lot of questions. Like if you just draw with a pencil on a paper, like that column, and you just do like a line drawing, like the line is what delineates it from the ground, and that's kind of just seems magical in a way, like, and it allows me to question like what is a line, like what is a line in reality, like if there's a line, like how can I draw this space between us, like if it was a line, what would that look like? And also just to ask questions, like in the terms of like a figure and a ground, like, you know, when you draw, there's a figure and the ground, and just thinking about other things in that relationship, like I'm the figure, what ground am I on, and like if like space is a figure, what ground is that on? If time is a figure, what ground does that stand on? Like, kind of just drawing allows me to think in a way where I kind of try to delineate stuff. I don't know. It's just fun and like it's nice. I don't know.
So I was that child that drew all on the walls, and I would always get in trouble for it. In undergrad, I was trained to be as a painter, and I always found that the drawings were far better than the paintings. And it wasn't until I, by pure chance, came across the work of William Kendridge that I saw an artist that was taking drawing completely seriously, and this was the medium. And I was like, okay, done. That did it for me, and it gave me confidence to say, actually, this is the medium in which I would like to process these set of thoughts and questions, and
Yeah, actually, as a curator now, I wanted to be an artist, so I always drew since I was a kid, and you all should be grateful I'm not an artist now. But going into studios, often the drawings you see are fantastic, and then the attempts, the struggle to translate whatever it was from this drawing, whatever it was learned or processed or considered in this drawing, often the translation into paint is not as successful because painting is so freighted. It's so freighted. It's so intimidating to make a painting. If you think about the history of Western painting alone, let alone other traditions and histories of painting outside of the United States and Europe. So that's why I thought about doing this kind of exhibition series, starting with the first show, because drawing really, for me, is hardwired into finding, this voice, finding this space where you come to voice as an artist, and it can be personal, but it also can be very intellectual and very liberating in the ability to very rapidly solve problems, think through issues or ideas, translate words into images or objects, or whether it's abstract or not abstract. So from all of your reflections on the idea of drawing, it seems that this is still something that I was right. I don't know. And I thank you all for answering my questions, and so beautifully and so honestly. And with that, I think I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. Erin, is this a good time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. I just would like to say thank you so much for have the courage to expose your work. I'm very sure it wasn't easy. And actually come and be an exhibit at the High Museum. It's high, Well, I'm very intrigued by this. And it's,
Okay.
First I thought it was water, and you say it wasn't, because your other one, it is an ocean, right? From the two prints.
Okay. You want me to explain that picture?
Please.
Okay. It's the landscape of Mars. And the theme is come from a Buddhist story about the great Buddha, Xie Caomin. His prayer life was a prince. And one day he was playing with his two older brothers in the forest. And he saw a hungry tigress. She didn't have the milk to milk her cubs. So the prince, the Buddha, decided to sacrifice himself to the tiger. And then the tiger will have the strength and then will have the milk to milk her cubs. So it's about the concept of the story of a mercy in Buddhism. But for me, I think the story is pretty graphic. Buddhist core idea of peace and mercy, but in the story shows as such a violent picture. And that's make me think about today's world. Something we think is normal, natural, like legal, illegal. If we think about the system structure versus those actual events or those actual crises happening, that has the kind of paradox. And I think that's the story of Buddha sacrifice himself to the tiger is a very good metaphor. And the background of the landscape of Mars, because we know no human being have ever landed on Mars. And not yet. And Mars can be our humans' hope or a paradise after we did a really bad thing on Earth, pollute the whole Earth, maybe we can immigrate to Mars. And actually NASA named that certain territory on Mars called Elysium. Elysium in Greek means a kind of space for gods to live. And in English version of the Buddhist sutra, this word in Buddhism means paradise. So just all those kind of information come together. So it's that drawing.
Alan, will you share the source of the image of the Buddha?
Yeah,
The source of the image. Could you share that with us as well?
Oh, sure, yes.
I think
I mean, the image of from the sutra or the text or something, or what?
Of the child on the shore, on the beach?
Oh, okay. Thank you to reminding me. Actually, the idea first coming in my mind is from that news photo of a Syrian boy died on the Turkish beach. So this just let me think about it. It's about immigration, refugee, and now we accept this word undocumented, like it's making everything seems smooth. But how can we define a person simply across from one territory to another territory? We say it's illegal, like a crime. And that boy searched for living with his family. He died, and we see the news. A lot of people probably see that news image. It's pretty violent, but probably we forget behind that. We think about maybe the war, maybe because the today's political conflict, but behind that, the whole system about the. Maybe we can trace back to nation state and the whole system. We feel we are totally naturally accepted that. That's part of the violence.
I have a question back here.
Yes.
My name is Missy, and I'm a child of immigrants, a first-generation Jamaican American. Woo, Jamaica! I was curious when you felt the greatest sense of belonging. Is it in a specific place? Is it with a specific group of people or a time?
Well, I think I feel the most like I belong in a really diverse space. So like, not like an all Korean space or an all white space, but like a space with like a lot of people. I feel the most comfortable. But one specific instance I can remember of like really feeling like I belonged in America was the night when Trump got elected, because like I was scared and anxious, and seeing other people be scared and anxious made me feel connected. Which is like weird, I guess. Like it's not the best place to belong, you know.
We'll do one more, and then we'll get everybody into the galleries. And then if the artists will join us, we'd love that.
Hello. I was wondering what your feelings individually are about Atlanta as a place, and how it is it now a place that you consider yourself from, with your differing origins, and has it been a welcoming and fertile place for you?
So at this point, I've lived in Atlanta longer than any other American state. In fact, the first job I ever had was working here at the High as an audio guide technician, so I just gave out headsets. That was a long, long time ago. But I feel Atlanta has been very good to me. It has been a very welcoming space. I've enjoyed the artist community. What I like about the artist community in Atlanta is that it is a space in which one can explore can experiment, and it's a space in which I felt people have been very supportive. The general vibe I get is that rising waters raises all boats, so people kind of look out for one another. So I have appreciated that.
Yeah, so when I was 7 years old and I got here, the first place I ever lived and where I grew up was Buford Highway. So seeing like carnicerias and panaderias and like Spanish, like signage in Spanish was like, helped me feel really welcome and like, oh, okay, not everything's in a foreign language, because English was foreign to me. It wasn't the other way around. But then, like, when people ask me where I'm from, I always say Atlanta because I feel like this is home for me. Even though I was born in Mexico, because I can't come in and out of the country, I don't really have a big connection to my home country. But then we're still in Georgia, right? Right? And so it's really hard to feel like this is home and like I belong and like people like me belong because, I mean, there's so many things, right? But when you look specifically at immigration, like just today, I got a phone call from one of my former students that graduated that ICE was in his neighborhood. So to me, as long as ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they're just pretty much a deportation machine, and they don't really have like any sort of checklist. They go into communities that are vulnerable and take whoever looks undocumented because they've taken U.S. citizens and green card holders. And so to me, it's like if every time Trump tweets that there's going to be ICE raids, and Atlanta was one of the cities on that list, if I have to have a conversation with my mom about what to do if she gets pulled over, or if like someone else is driving and the car is pulled over, or what to do if ICE comes to the door, if my former students are still calling me to tell me that ICE is like right outside their apartment, it's not welcoming. It's not okay for people to live like this. So I have this like back and forth where I'm like, yeah, ATL, and then I'm like, but then ICE, and we're still in Georgia, so.
Well, I think that the fact that I made that horrible mistake that I knew you were from California, I don't know, in my haste. But the fact that I identified you as a Georgia native speaks to my feelings about this city, and specifically this city, and how when I moved to this city, I moved here from Honolulu, and I've always described Atlanta as having a lot of aloha, which I guess other people describe as Southern hospitality. But a very welcoming place that is also a place where, as Cosmo was describing, people look out for each other and support each other, especially the artistic community in the city and the gallerists, Dianna being both. And I, in addition to educators and activists, I so admire your work, Jessica, Yehimi, as activists and artists, and your work, Alan and Cosmo, as educators in the city, bringing up new generations of artists in our city. And Wihro and Dianna, you're being out in the scene and being critical and really vibrant members of our artistic community who are pushing the envelope. So for that reason, and many others, I wanted to bring you all together, and I'm so happy I did. So thank you. Thank you all. And we will adjourn to the galleries, and we'll all be there for a little while, so I look forward to seeing you there.